Alex Baldwin is suing Santa Fe, New Mexico district attorney, two special prosecutors, and other local officials of mishandling evidence, defaming him, and maliciously abusing the judicial process in their unsuccessful pursuit of charges against him regarding their unsuccessful charges for the fatal shooting on the Rust set. So Alex Baldwin is represented by Quinn Emanuel, which is the same law firm that represents Jay-Z in his legal battles with Tony Busby. And he filed a complaint in Santa Fe County's First Judicial District Court. The complaint is shown on the screen here. His suit comes just a few months after a New Mexico judge refused to reconsider a decision throwing out the involuntary manslaughter charges against him after cinematographer Helena Hutchins was killed on the set of the film Rust in 2021. Prosecutors, including Special Prosecutor Carrie Morrissey, alleged that Baldwin acted recklessly with guns on the set of Rust, a low-budget Western film, and that his actions led to Hutchins' death. However, Baldwin said on Thursday that Morrissey, Santa Fe District Attorney Mary Karnick Atways, Santa Fe County Board commissioners, and other officials violated his rights, cherry-picked evidence, and abused the process in general. According to Baldwin, it should have been immediately apparent to investigators that he had no culpability in the shooting. Before it happened, a crew member handed him the prop gun and declared that it was a cold gun, meaning he believed it had been inspected and didn't contain live rounds, he said. But at every turn, officials looked to scapegoat him for the acts and omissions of others, the complaint states. So defendants must now be held accountable for their malicious and unlawful pursuit of Baldwin, it says. Although no verdict in this civil case can undo the trauma the state's threat of conviction and incarceration has inflicted, Alex Baldwin has filed this action to hold defendants responsible for their appalling violations of the laws that governed their work. In late October, First Judicial District Judge Mary Marlowe Sommer rejected the state's motion to reconsider the dismissal of Baldwin's involuntary manslaughter case, finding that it was not well taken and should be denied because it relied on rehashed factual arguments along with fresh legal arguments that could have been raised earlier. For one, Judge Sumner said Morrissey had a chance to argue against dismissal during a July 12th evidence hearing. However, the state elected not to make any argument following the introduction of evidence during the hearing and chose not to ask the court to recess the hearing to allow additional time for the state to conduct research and prepare argument, Judge Summer said at the time. She also said that prosecutors intentionally and deliberately withheld ammunition evidence from Baldwin and his defense team, spurring her to permanently toss involuntary manslaughter charges against the actor, who wept in the courtroom as the state's case against him crumbled. On top of that, the state missed the 30-day deadline to file an appeal, according to Judge Summer. Morrissey had filed a motion to reconsider dismissal before the deadline expired, but her 52-page filing violated the local rule, limiting the motion to 10 pages, the judge said. Baldwin said in Thursday's complaint that the officials' misconduct in their pursuit of Baldwin and the trial judge's condemnation of them has already drawn worldwide attention. But this action is necessary to vindicate Baldwin's rights and deter the defendants from attempting to do this to anyone else, his complaint states. Specifically, Baldwin said Special Prosecutor Andrea Reeb used the prosecution of him to advance her simultaneous run for the New Mexico legislature. He also said he was charged with an enhancement to increase his potential sentence despite that enhancement not being enacted until after the shooting. And Special Prosecutor Morrissey just wanted to teach Baldwin a lesson because she deemed him to be an arrogant prick, he said. Notably, Baldwin alleged that Morrissey manipulated evidence she presented and chose not to present per the complaint. While exculpatory evidence was intentionally concealed, certain defendants lied from the witness stand during trial about their cover-up, Baldwin said. His complaint includes claims alleging the defendants violated his constitutional rights, maliciously abused the process, intentionally spoliated evidence, which means intentionally destroyed evidence, defamed him, and violated the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. Hutchins was shot inside a church on set when a revolver that Baldwin was holding fired. Baldwin has denied any wrongdoing and argued that the gun had been modified in a way that allowed it to fire without him squeezing the trigger. During the third day of testimony in Baldwin's trial, his attorneys said that they had discovered that law enforcement and prosecutors concealed evidence indicating that a prop supplier might have been the source of live rounds on set. The source of those rounds remains a key question in the case, one that has yet to be answered definitively. Meanwhile, Morrissey testified during the hearing that she'd done nothing wrong and asserted later in the court filing that Baldwin's attorneys had confused Judge Summer, leading her to wrongly dismiss the case. Before Baldwin's botched trial, a New Mexico state jury convicted the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, of involuntary manslaughter in Hutchins' death. Gutierrez-Reed, who was in charge of weapons and ammunition on set, mistakenly loaded Baldwin's gun with live ammunition, according to prosecutors. In September, Judge Summer declined to throw out that conviction, finding that she had failed to show that any of the allegedly suppressed evidence in Baldwin's case might have changed the outcome of her trial. Gutierrez-Reed is serving an 18-month prison sentence and is appealing her conviction. And late last month, Special Prosecutor Morrissey withdrew the state's November notice appealing the dismissal of the criminal involuntary manslaughter charges against Baldwin. District Attorney Carmack Alvarez issued a statement supporting that decision and commending the special prosecutor for her work. Helena's tragic death has prompted industry-wide scrutiny, specifically in New Mexico, of safety protocols, especially the use of firearms and live ammunition on set, Carmack Alvarez said in the statement. Helena's family set up the Helena Hutchins Foundation to advocate for safer practices in the industry, promoting safety education, and honoring her legacy as a talented filmmaker. Her office added that it disagrees with the court's decision, but it remains steadfast in its mission to uphold justice. There is still much work to be done in criminal court, and our office will continue to diligently prosecute cases with integrity, fairness, and commitment to the rule of law. Baldwin's attorneys, Luke Nikas and Alec Spiro is also Jay-Z's attorney, said in a joint statement Thursday that criminal prosecutions are supposed to be about the search for truth and justice, not to pursue personal or political gain or harass the innocent. Carrie Morrissey and the other defendants violated that basic principle over and over and trampled on Alec Baldwin's rights, they said. We bring this action to hold the defendants accountable for their misconduct and to prevent them from doing this to anyone else. The district attorney and special prosecutor's offices couldn't be immediately reached for comment late Thursday. So I think that's a really important quote where Baldwin's attorneys said in a joint statement that, quote, criminal prosecutions are supposed to be about the search for truth and justice, not to pursue personal or political gain or harass the innocent. So I love that quote. And I want to go through with y'all here the complaint in detail that Alec Baldwin has filed against the New Mexico Santa Fe district attorney, who he believes to have been relentlessly prosecuting him and failing to look at what he believes to be very clear evidence that it was not involuntary manslaughter and that he should not have been charged with that. So when we look at this complaint, the first thing we're going to look at is the cover page. And we do see that this is filed by Alexander R. Baldwin III versus Carrie T. Morrissey, Mary Carmack Alvarez, Andrea Reeb, Jennifer Paget Facias, the First Judicial District Attorney's Office, Alexandria Hancock, Marissa Popple, Brian Brandel, and Santa Fe County Board of County Commissioners. They're filing for violation of rights under Section 1983, which is a federal law. This Section 1983 is actually a federal statute that does allow individuals to have private causes of action against state entities when the state officials are acting under the color of law, under the color of state law. So essentially, Section 1983 is a way to pierce state immunity. So normally there is something called sovereign immunity, where state entities are typically immune from lawsuit, and that has an ideology and a premise behind it that we can't always have the state having to spend taxpayer dollars defending against lots of lawsuits. So in the broad sense of the word, states do typically enjoy sovereign immunity against a number of different types of suits. However, when there are civil rights violations, an individual can use Section 1983, a federal statute, to sue a state entity for a civil rights violation. Alex Baldwin's second claim is conspiracy to cause violation of rights under Section 1983, malicious abuse of process, intentional spoliation of evidence, which means destruction of evidence, defamation, violation of New Mexico's Civil Rights Act, and he is demanding a jury trial. So this complaint states that Alexander R. Baldwin III, through his attorneys Quinn Emanuel, brings this action for deprivation of rights afforded by the Constitution and laws of the United States, malicious abuse of process, intentional spoliation of evidence, defamation, and violation of the New Mexico Civil Rights Act against Carrie T. Morrissey and all of those defendants. The complaint alleges as follows. The highest duty of all who investigate, charge, and prosecute criminal cases in the state of New Mexico is to fairly and impartially apply the state's awesome powers. Criminal prosecutors are to be guided by the search for truth and justice, not to pursue personal or political gain or harass the innocent. On the second page of his complaint, Baldwin goes on to state that for the better part of the last 3 years, however, defendants repudiated these obligations, blinded by their desire to convict Alec Baldwin for all the wrong reasons and at any cost for the October 2021 accidental shooting of Helena Hutchins. Defendants' misconduct in their pursuit of Baldwin and the trial judge's condemnation of them has already drawn worldwide attention, but this action is necessary to vindicate Baldwin's rights and deter the defendants from attempting to do this to anyone else. From the moment defendant and their agents set foot on the scene of the incident, it should have been apparent that Baldwin had no culpability. Minutes before, a member of the crew had handed him a prop handgun and loudly called out "cold gun" to assure Baldwin and everyone else present that it had been inspected and contained only non-explosive dummy rounds. But unbeknownst to Baldwin, the prop had been loaded with live rounds that looked similar to dummy rounds. The prop fired a live round and killed Hutchins. Defendants sought at every turn to scapegoat Baldwin for the acts and omissions of others, regardless of the evidence or the law. This included defendant Andrea Reeb, a special prosecutor who used the prosecution of Baldwin to advance her simultaneous run for the New Mexico legislature. It included defendants unlawfully charging Baldwin with an enhancement to increase the potential sentence from 18 months to 5 years, even though the enhancement was not enacted until after the incident. It included Special Prosecutor Carrie Morrissey, who wanted to teach Baldwin a lesson because she deemed him to be an arrogant prick, and it included her extracting an indictment by manipulating the evidence she presented and chose not to present. Most notably, it included certain defendants' intentional concealment of exculpatory evidence and then lying from the witness stand during trial about their a cover-up. For First Judicial District Judge Mary Marlowe Summer, that was the last straw. During those 2 days, Judge Summer heard testimony from SFSO crime lab technician Marissa Popple and SFSO Lieutenants Brian Brandel and Alexandra Hancock about the circumstances under which the live rounds had come into the defendant's possession and how defendants intentionally chose not to log them to the case file at the insistence of Special Prosecutor Morrissey to keep Baldwin from knowing about them. So there's a claim here of basically concealment of evidence. Judge Summer inspected the ammunition that defendants had failed to disclose and instantly recognized their exculpatory significance. That same day, Morrissey called herself to the stand and gave perjurious testimony in an attempt to justify her misconduct. Judge Summer found that the state's willful withholding of this information was intentional and deliberate. If this conduct does not rise to the level of bad faith, it certainly comes so near to bad faith as to show signs of scorching prejudice. Based on those findings, Judge Summer concluded there is no way for the court to right this wrong, and dismissal of the criminal case with prejudice was the only warranted remedy. Defendants must now be held accountable for their malicious and unlawful pursuit of Baldwin. Although no verdict in this civil case can undo the trauma the state's threat of conviction and incarceration has inflicted, Alec Baldwin has filed this action to hold defendants responsible for their appalling violations of the laws that governed their work. Then they go on to talk about jurisdiction and venue, and then they go through and talk about the parties. Jurisdiction and venue just means they have to set forth it's appropriate for them to be in this court, and then they name all of the different parties and who they are and what their relationship to the case is. These are, for example, the district attorney, two special prosecutors, individuals who are supposed to be investigating, the board of commissioners. And then let's move on to the facts that Alex Baldwin is alleging. He is saying that the Rust production in 2018, he began working with writer-director Joel Souza on a Western movie titled Rust. Rust tells the story of a boy in 1880s Kansas who accidentally kills a local rancher and is sentenced to hang. After being broken out of prison by his estranged grandfather, an outlaw named Harland Rust, they flee to New Mexico on a dangerous journey through an unforgiving landscape, forming a close bond along the way. Throughout 2019 to 2021, Baldwin worked on the project with Souza and Rust's team of producers, Ryan Smith, Nathan Klinger, Ryan Winterstein, Matt Del Piano, and Angel Najan. Smith individually and through his production company, Rust Movie Productions, LLC, was primarily responsible for getting the production up and running. He and the other producers pitched Rust to investors, securing financing and set the budget. Baldwin was also producer, but his authority was limited to creative decisions. He lacked the authority to hire crew members and make other non-creative decisions. Smith hired Gabrielle Pickle as a line producer, and the two of them, along with Messieurs Winterstern and Klinger, hired the crew. Once the film was in production, Messieurs Smith, Klinger, Winterstern, and Pickle oversaw Rust's day-to-day operations, along with the film's unit production manager, Roe Walters. The production began filming on October 6, 2021. That day, Baldwin and his production company, El Dorado Pictures, Inc., entered into a producer agreement with Ryan Smith and Rust Movie Productions, LLC. So that's an interesting fact that he actually had a role as a producer on this film, Rust. And the production agreement reflects Baldwin's creative role and his lack of authority on hiring and budget decisions. Baldwin did not arrive on set until the second week of filming, when it was time for him to appear on camera as Harland Rust. Soon after arriving, Rust met with Hutchins, Rust's cinematographer, also known as the director of photography, and Souza. They discussed their creative vision for the film and how to tell the story through the camera, taking advantage of the vast, quiet expanses of New Mexico's landscape. They did not discuss safety at that meeting, and at no point did Baldwin discuss gun safety with anyone beyond Zachary Gutierrez-Reeds, Halls, and Nicole Montoya, a props assistant. While on the set, Baldwin never saw or became aware of any significant safety issues. Control over firearms on the Rust set. Firearms safety on movie sets. The film industry has standards regarding the handling of firearms on set. The first rule, with which virtually all cast and crew members are familiar, is that, quote, live ammunition that contains explosive powder and a projectile, is never allowed on a stage or set. On film sets, prop guns may be loaded with blanks, which contain explosive powder but no projectile, or with dummy rounds or dummies, which are designed to look like real bullets but contain no charges. They cannot detonate and are inert. Dummies are used in close-ups, where the movie audience will be able to see the lead tip of the rounds for ammunition. Blanks have crimped ends and no projectile. The ammunition's rim, base, or primer, the circular insert piece of metal at the center of the base, is usually not visible from a front camera position. So that's interesting. They're really kind of talking about the anatomy of the guns and what is standard on a set in a Western. And I'm not even sure. I wonder why it's necessary to even have dummy rounds, I guess, if you need to have it look like there is something in the gun. So the below images show a variety of types of dummy ammunition. As they show, live rounds may be indistinguishable from dummy rounds. So that's kind of dangerous in my view, because they're basically saying that a dummy round could look very synonymous to a real round, a real live round. The safe use of firearms on set is the responsibility of the property master or prop master or the prop master's designee, in most cases, the armorer. These individuals are responsible for sourcing firearms, blanks, and dummies. They have the necessary training and expertise to identify live versus dummy ammunition. The prop master for Rust was Sarah Zachary, and the armorer was Hannah Gutierrez Reed. Both Zachary and Gutierrez Reed came with strong recommendations from the production's ammo supplier, Seth Kenney, who had worked with them on previous projects. Baldwin was not involved in or even aware of the decision to hire Zachary or Gutierrez Reed and did not meet with them until he arrived on set. So it sounds like Alec Baldwin did not have much to do with the props. He did not have much to do with safety, it doesn't sound like. So in addition to the prop master and armorer, the first assistant director or first AD is in charge of set safety and is the last line of defense for firearm safety on set. Dave Halls was the first AD on Rust. Although industry guidance instructs that it's best to avoid pointing a firearm at anyone, the same guidance notes that this does occur while making a movie and explains that when pointing a gun at another is absolutely necessary, it should be done in consultation with the prop master or his or her designee. Here, that would be Gutierrez Reed and the first AD Halls. At bottom, the prop master, armorer, and first AD, not actors, bear responsibility for firearm safety on the set. So his complaint is really setting up the fact that like the actor is not responsible. The actors don't have the specialized knowledge to be able to identify a dummy round versus a live round. So then Alex Baldwin's complaint goes on to state that, quote, cold gun is a widely understood term in the film industry. It refers to a firearm that has been inspected to confirm that it has not been loaded with any live or blank rounds. It contains no explosives and is therefore incapable of firing. The term cold gun is meant to distinguish between a gun loaded with blanks and a gun that is empty or loaded with dummies. A cold gun does not contain any live ammunition. The announcement of a cold gun by the armorer or first AD is meant to assure all present on the set that the gun has been properly checked for the absence of any ammunition other than dummy rounds, so that the cast and crew members may go about their work knowing that the firearm is incapable of causing harm. Baldwin received standard firearms training on Rust. The day after he arrived on set, Baldwin received firearm training from Rust's armorer, Gutierrez Reed. The training lasted around 90 minutes. During the session, Gutierrez Reed reminded Baldwin of gun safety measures he had learned at substantially similar gun training throughout his career, such as putting the gun down when cut is called, not to force the gun if it jams, and not to fire it when empty. Gutierrez Reed also reminded Baldwin that he would need to feign the prop's recoil because blank rounds do not generate any. But Gutierrez-Reed did not instruct Baldwin that he should check the gun himself. In fact, she told Baldwin that it was her job to check the gun, not his. Baldwin followed Gutierrez-Reed's instructions during the gun safety training and throughout his time on the Rust set. The events of October 21, 2021. On October 21, 2021, the Rust cast and crew were filming a scene in a small church where Baldwin's character, Harland Rust, takes cover after a shootout. The scene involves a close-up view of the revolver he is holding that he is required to cock, in other words, pull the hammer back, before a shootout begins with shotguns booming and Colts exploding. So this is the actual scene where the devastating incident occurred. They began rehearsing the scene before lunch, with Baldwin practicing his cross draw for the camera. In a video recording the rehearsal, Souza told Baldwin to draw and point the gun and whip it out in front of the camera. After Baldwin practiced the move a few times, someone off camera said, "Nice." When the cast and crew broke for lunch, Gutierrez-Reed took the pistol from Baldwin. Souza, Hutchins, and Baldwin stayed behind to discuss the insert shot they were planning to film after lunch, which involved capturing a close-up of Baldwin's cross draw with the camera tightly focused on the gun. They understood that to achieve this close-up, the unloaded pistol would need to be loaded with dummies so that the pistol would not appear on screen to be unloaded. At some point during or after lunch, Gutierrez-Reed loaded the pistol with what she believed to be 6 dummy rounds. Gutierrez-Reed then brought the pistol into the church and showed it to Halls, telling him that she had loaded it with dummy rounds. She rotated the cylinder for Halls, who agreed that the prop gun was safe to handle. As Halls handed the prop gun to Baldwin, Halls announced that there was a cold gun on set. That meant that the prop gun had been inspected and was incapable of firing even a blank or causing harm. Meanwhile, Hutchins continued to evaluate her camera angle for the scene. In Baldwin's experience, the cinematographer or director of photography has significant input into an actor's performance, particularly as to what is or is not in the frame. Hutchins directed Baldwin accordingly. Baldwin was sitting in a church pew looking at Hutchins. He held the gun, which Halls had just announced was safe. Hutchins was standing camera right to Baldwin's left, next to the camera operator, and looking back and forth between Baldwin and the camera operator's monitor. She was determining how best to angle the camera and what movements Baldwin would make for her to capture the cocking of the gun the script had called for. Baldwin asked Hutchins what she would like him to do. He pulled the gun out slowly and held it still before Hutchins began giving him further direction. She described how she wanted Baldwin to place the gun. She told Baldwin to hold the gun higher to a point where it was directed toward her. As she gave these instructions, she was looking carefully at the monitor and then at Baldwin and then back again. Baldwin asked Hutchins if she wanted to see him cock the gun as the script required. She responded yes. Baldwin tipped the gun down so that the camera would focus on his hand's action on the top of the gun. While performing this action, Baldwin asked Hutchins, "Am I holding it too far down? And do you see that?" Hutchins said that she could see Baldwin's actions. As later became known, a live round discharged from the gun and struck Hutchins, traveling through her body and striking Souza in the shoulder. Both Hutchins and Souza fell to the ground. Panic and confusion immediately ensued. No one understood what had happened. Baldwin and others in the church were ordered to leave. The on-set medic and others rushed to render aid to Hutchins and Souza. Rust's script supervisor, Mamie Mitchell, called 911 and told the operator that 2 people had been accidentally shot on a movie set by a prop gun. A few seconds later, Mitchell can be heard saying on a recording, "This effing AD, Dave Halls, he's supposed to check the gun. He's responsible for what happens on the set." Okay, so that's some important facts, because this was an excited utterance. She's on the 911 call. The script supervisor is saying that what happened was 2 people had been accidentally shot on the movie set by a prop gun. And then Mitchell, who is the script supervisor was heard on the recording blaming Dave Halls, who was the armorer. He's supposed to check the guns. He's responsible for what happens on set. So again, these are facts that Baldwin's attorneys are bringing out now, because these are facts that he feels should not have led to him being charged for the shooting. Paramedics arrived shortly and worked to stabilize Hutchins and Souza. Outside the church, Baldwin and others began to speak to each other to try to piece together what had just happened. Baldwin thought that Hutchins may have fainted or had a heart attack. Unaware that a real bullet had struck Souza, Baldwin was confused as to why Souza was screaming in pain. As the cast and crew were gathered, still reeling from the incident, Mitchell approached Baldwin and said, "You realize you're not responsible for any of what happened in there, don't you?" Hutchins was airlifted to a hospital but succumbed to her injuries. Souza was treated at the hospital and recovered. SFSO officers arrived at the set less than 15 minutes after the 911 call. When they arrived, they did not separate the witnesses, instead allowing people to mingle and talk about the incident and speculate about what might have happened. Nor did the law enforcement personnel immediately establish a perimeter around the area, instead allowing cast and crew to move freely around. They also failed to immediately secure the prop cart or the firearms on set, allowing crew members to continue to enter the scene and handle and even discard key pieces of evidence. Oh, God. I guess because they may not have realized that the full extent of what happened yet. So then it says law enforcement did not secure the prop truck where the property department and armor stored their materials for 6 days, again leaving critical evidence vulnerable to manipulation. Oh God, so there's the crime scene was not secured. That's a whole big issue with a criminal prosecution. And then Baldwin's complaint states law enforcement eventually spoke with those who were involved in the incident, taking down their information. SFSO Deputy Nicholas Lafleur approached Alec Baldwin, who immediately said, "I was the one holding the gun," and asked, "What do you need?" After changing out of his clothes and giving them to law enforcement, Baldwin voluntarily drove himself to the SFSO station and sat for an interview with Detectives Alexandria, Hancock, and Samantha Telemany. He spoke freely with Detective Hancock and Detective Telemany for over 1 hour, declining their invitation to have a lawyer present because Baldwin at that time didn't realize that the gun was loaded with a live round. He didn't know that what had happened. He didn't know that he thought that the Hutchins had fainted. At the time, Baldwin had yet to learn what they already knew, that Hutchins had died. They waited until the interview was over to tell him. At the conclusion of the interview, one of the detectives showed Baldwin a photograph of the .45 caliber bullet that had just been removed from Souza's shoulder at the hospital. Baldwin recognized the object as a bullet, and he finally began to comprehend what had transpired on the set. He was shocked. It was unimaginable to him that a live round could have been present on the ranch property or on the prop truck, let alone in the gun itself, a gun declared cold by the film's head of safety. From the start, investigators focused on a key question. How did live ammunition end up on a movie set, where the presence of live ammunition is, in the state's own words, incomprehensible? Law enforcement quickly recognized that it was the presence of live ammunition and not Baldwin's handling of a movie prop that transformed an everyday rehearsal into a fatal disaster. Questions about Baldwin's handling of the firearm, whether he had cocked it or pulled the trigger and where he was putting it when it went off, were treated as an afterthought. So he's saying they didn't address the investigation appropriately. For example, although Baldwin consistently maintained that the gun just went off and that it would have defied his normal practice to pull the trigger during a rehearsal, investigators did not swab the trigger for DNA because they realized that whether Baldwin's finger was on the trigger was irrelevant to how live ammunition ended up on the set and who was responsible for that. Okay. So within a matter of days, however, things began to change as elected officials and high-ranking members of law enforcement became increasingly involved in the case. Amid this transition, the investigation's lead detective stepped down and a new detective, Alexandra Hancock, took over. According to Detective Hancock, prosecutors from the FJDA were heavily involved in SFSO's investigation from the beginning, with investigative decisions being made collectively by a team that included prosecutors. Up to this point, the investigation into the source of the live round was focused on whether the lethal round came from the crew of Rust, Gutierrez, Reed, or Zachary, or whether someone from outside of the crew, Seth Kenney, had provided it. As prosecutors became more involved in the case, however, their focus shifted from identifying the sources of the live ammunition. They instead fixated on Baldwin. This shift occurred even as more evidence emerged that Seth Kenney, a third-party ammo supplier, may have been the source of the live round. And it continued, despite the consistent finding throughout the investigation that it is not an actor's job to check for live rounds inside a prop gun, that those responsible for gun safety have cleared for use. Driven by the prosecutor's agenda, SFSO began to ignore critical evidence as to how live ammunition ended up on the set. And this is what the lawyers are saying. Alex Baldwin's lawyers are saying, look, regardless of how he was handling it, regardless of what went down, it's not the actor's responsibility to check for live ammunition when the safety crew, the people who are responsible for safety, have already informed this actor that it's okay and that it's cold and it's okay to use. And also, why was there even live ammunition on the set to begin with? That's a critical question that seems to be being ignored, because if not for the live ammunition on set, there could not have been this lethal incident. So, for example, SFSO waited 6 days before executing a search warrant on the prop truck, the vehicle where firearms and ammunition had been stored. At Gutierrez Reed's trial, Detective Hancock testified that this delay occurred because FSSO didn't have information until later on that this prop truck had been involved in the props department and that we would potentially need to be looking for evidence there, which is why we didn't conduct that search until a few days later. That testimony was false. Within hours of the incident, Detective Hancock knew of the importance of the prop truck when Gutierrez Reed told her that the guns and the dummies and everything were kept on the prop truck. In fact, the search warrant states that Detective Hancock conducted an interview with Hannah Gutierrez, who advised on the day of the incident the firearms were secured inside a safe on a prop truck and the ammo was also kept inside the prop truck. Detective Hancock lied about her knowledge of the prop truck to cover up the real reason SFSO waited 6 days to execute its warrant. Prosecutors were not interested in pursuing the source of the lethal round because if it turned out that the round came from an outside source, such as Seth Kenney, it would be difficult to blame Baldwin. This was confirmed by two sets of prosecutors, both of whom sought to hold Baldwin criminally responsible for failing to supervise crew members based on his role as a producer. SFSO waited more than 1 month to execute a search warrant on Kenney's business, PDQ Arm and Prop LLC, despite learning within hours of the incident that PDQ was Rust's ammo supplier. This delay would be troubling under any circumstances, but it was particularly troubling here, given that Detective Hancock knew at the time. On November 1st, 2021, 30 days before conducting a search of PDQ, Detective Hancock met with Kenney at the SFSO station. During the meeting, Kenney phoned someone named Joe Swanson to determine the whereabouts of several hundred live rounds that were reportedly given to Kenney that were said to match the live rounds found on the set of Rust. Wow, that's a lot. Several hundred live rounds when there really aren't supposed to be any live rounds on a movie set. When Swanson told Kenney that the rounds had been kept loose in an ammo can, Kenney hung up the phone and swore repeatedly because the ammo can Swanson was referring to had been sitting at PDQ all along. Once he was done cursing, Kenney stated, well, Gutierrez Reed didn't do her effing job, suggesting that even if he had supplied live ammo to the set of Rust, he couldn't be blamed for Hutchins' death. Even though Detective Hancock was present when Kenney realized that he may have been the person who had inadvertently supplied live ammunition to the set of Rust and watched him curse at the realization, she indefensibly waited 30 days to search Kenney's business. This gave Kenney a month to dispose of any evidence linking him to the accident. When SFSO executed the search warrant on November 30th, 2021, the ammo can was empty. Conveniently, someone had even written empty on the can itself.
SFSO also failed to pursue other leads that may have identified the source of the live rounds, which would have weakened the state's case against Baldwin. For example, at least 3 different people told SFSO or the FJDA that persons connected to the film were firing live ammunition at the Bonanza Creek Ranch on or around the day of the accident. At least 2 of these persons felt that law enforcement had brushed off their statements or not taken them seriously. They were barely mentioned in the sheriff's incident report. One person reported that shortly after the incident, he had overheard individuals who worked on another film and who had come into his shop and had been discussing how some of the people working on Rust had been firing live ammunition to shoot cans off of posts. This person reported this to the SFSO, but there was no follow-up. As a team, the SFSO decided not to seek fingerprint or DNA testing of live rounds found on the set to determine who is responsible for bringing them there. So basically, Baldwin's attorneys are saying they all just wanted to point the finger at Baldwin and say that as a producer, he failed to supervise the crew members. The condition of the prop gun, particularly whether it showed signs of damage or modification on the day of the incident, was an important issue in the investigation and in any potential prosecution. But defendants' investigation of this issue is calculated to hide the facts and resulted in the intentional destruction of the gun. Throughout the investigation, Baldwin repeatedly told investigators that the gun just went off. Several witnesses who were inside the church also told investigators that the gun just went off. At first, investigators did not seem to question the veracity of these accounts, but in April 2022, 6 months after the incident, the SFSO asked the FBI to test the prop gun. According to Detective Hancock, the SFSO's purpose for doing so was to disprove what Baldwin said during a televised ABC News interview, that he did not pull the trigger. On April 21st, 2022, FBI Special Agent Jose Cortez, at Detective Hancock's instruction, directed the FBI to perform an enhanced test to determine whether the firearm would fire without pressing the trigger. As the FBI knew, and as it told the FSSO, this testing subjects the firearm to a substantial external impact and was all but certain to break it. Special Agent Cortex therefore wrote that he and Detective Hancock knew that the requested testing will alter the firearm and it will no longer be in the same physical condition that it was seized in. Despite knowing this, no one from the prosecutor's office or the SFSO asked that the FBI lab document the internal components of the firearm before performing the destructive testing. Nor did anyone alert Baldwin or the other potential defendants to the possibility the key item of evidence was about to be destroyed. Oh, that's bad. That is bad. Because when this gun is a main piece of evidence, it's the main piece of evidence. And before you alter it or you do something that you know is going to alter it, you do need to make sure that you document the current status of it. And if Baldwin had known that or his lawyers had known that, they absolutely would have demanded that. FBI forensic examiner Bryce Ziegler conducted extremely aggressive testing on the revolver, striking it repeatedly with a mallet without documenting his process nor endeavoring to hold constant the force with which he struck it. Stunningly, Ziegler has admitted that he had never conducted this type of testing outside of a training environment. So this is kind of unusual, is what it seems like Baldwin's attorneys are getting at here. That inexperience led to disastrous results. Ziegler failed to disassemble the firearm or document its condition before testing it to look for worn, altered, otherwise defective parts. He did not even attempt to adapt the test to the circumstances of the incident. Instead, Ziegler began beating the firearm with a mallet until the trigger and other internal components broke. Oh my God. Oh my heavens. I mean, this is hard to believe that this is happening in when there's a criminal prosecution, when prosecutors are looking to charge Baldwin with this, and there's just so much what appears to be reckless alteration of the main piece of evidence, which is the gun that ultimately ended up killing Hutchins. This approach to testing the prop made no sense. The FSSO asked the FBI to test whether the firearm could fire without a pull of the trigger, but no one had ever suggested that a substantial force had struck the gun to cause it to fire, or anything else that would justify the kind of testing that Ziegler performed. As the state's own firearm expert later admitted, destructive testing was not called for in this case. Instead, the state and the FBI could have conducted at least one other more appropriate test, now impossible to perform, to determine if the prop gun had misfired. That would have been a push-off test, in which pressure is manually applied to the back of the hammer to determine if it will fall without the trigger being pulled. But instead, the FBI Ziegler inexplicably waited until after he conducted the destructive test before doing what he should have done first: take the prop gun apart to examine it for modification or damage. When he finally did so, he found signs of modification to the prop's internal components. Although some parts showed damage consistent with his mallet strikes, other parts showed unrelated alterations and damage. For example, the hammer had been rounded such that the sear would no longer stay lodged in the full cock notch, and the other notches, quartered in half, also appeared reduced in depth when compared to intact parts. The state's expert admitted these facts, describing the hammer as peened or rolled, rounded off, and full of very rough tool marks. As the state's experts later demonstrated, the hammer would not engage an intact sear in that condition, which would have allowed the hammer to fall without pulling the trigger. So they didn't perform a test that they should have performed first before they destroyed it. So then Baldwin's attorneys point out in this complaint the FBI's failure to examine those components before testing or document the prop gun's original condition made it impossible for Alec Baldwin to adequately reconstruct the prop gun, creating a gap in the evidentiary record that prevented Baldwin from recreating the FBI's tests, conducting his own tests on a functioning firearm in its original condition, inspecting the firearm in its original condition, evaluating the modifications and their effect before the gun was destroyed, or otherwise subjecting the FBI's analysis to the rigorous review necessary for a proper defense. The FBI's failure to document the firearm's original condition before conducting destructive testing and the SFSO's failure to ask for it deprived Baldwin of critical information that would have allowed Baldwin to test the component of the prosecution's eventual theory and his defense, whether the firearm was defective when the accident occurred and could have discharged a round without the trigger being pulled. The first prosecution. Reeb joined the prosecution for political gain. Even though Baldwin was not responsible for ensuring the safety of firearms or ammunition and was told by those who were responsible that the prop gun was safe, the district attorney decided to criminally charge Baldwin pretty close to the beginning of the investigation. To charge Baldwin with involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico statute, the state needed to believe that he had acted without due cause or circumspection, or that he handled or used the prop gun in a negligent manner, resulting in Hutchins' death. The state also needed to believe that Baldwin's negligence, and not the negligence of another person, such as the armorer, Halls, or the person who was responsible for the guns, Gutierrez Reed, and whoever brought live rounds on set, was the significant cause of Hutchins' death. And above all, even if the state did believe those things, its beliefs needed to be based on the actual evidence in its possession. So those are the elements of that criminal offense under New Mexico law. But the evidence in the state's possession supported the opposite conclusion, that Baldwin had exercised caution, and that even if he had not, Hutchins would still be alive if not for the superseding negligence of someone other than Alec Baldwin. By June 2022, Carmack Altvives had privately decided to appoint Andrea Reeb as a special prosecutor to assist with prosecutions. At that time, Reeb, the former district attorney for New Mexico's 9th Judicial District, was actively campaigning for a seat in the New Mexico House of Representatives. Reeb emailed Carmack Altvives on June 9th, 2022 to assure Carmack Altvives that she would not disclose to the media that she had been chosen as special prosecutor. At some point, though, Reeb continued, "I'd at least like to get out there that I am assisting you, as it might help in my campaign, LOL." Oh my gosh. 4 days later, Carmack Altvives, a Democrat, made a contribution to Reeb's Republican campaign. On August 3rd, 2022, the district attorney's office announced that Reeb would join the investigative team. Reeb immediately became the point of contact for defense counsel and indicated that she was the primary attorney reviewing the SFSO report and handling the investigation. She interviewed witnesses, took proffers, engaged experts, and handled other important matters. On August 30th, 2022, Carmack Outweaves requested $635,000 from New Mexico's Board of Finance to pay Reeb's salary and the hiring of other personnel for the investigation, including hiring Heather Brewer as Public Information Officer. The District Attorney's Office cited the need for a dedicated Public Information Officer to manage inquiries from the media. The state granted the District Attorney's Office $317,750. The state tried the case in the media. So this is what Baldwin's attorneys are saying. They're going to say that the state tried the case in the media. So Carmack, Outweaves, and Reeb, like all prosecutors in New Mexico, are bound by ethical rules in bringing and publicly commenting on criminal cases. According to the ethical standards promulgated by the National District Attorneys Association, the primary responsibility of a prosecutor is to seek justice, which can only be achieved by the representation and presentation of the truth. Thus, whether full-time or part-time, the position should be approached as a career and not as a stepping stone or sideline. No matter what other activities the prosecutor is involved in, her public duties come first. Moreover, the prosecutor should refrain from making extrajudicial comments before or during trial that promote no legitimate law enforcement purpose and that serve solely to heighten public condemnation of the accused. Similarly, prior to and during a criminal trial, the prosecutor should not make any public extrajudicial statement that has a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing a judicial proceeding. In particular, from the commencement of a criminal investigation until the conclusion of trial, the prosecutor should not make any public extrajudicial statements about, among other things, the character, reputation, or prior criminal conduct of a suspect, accused person, or prospective witness, the performance or results of any scientific tests, or statements concerning the credibility or anticipated testimony of prospective witnesses. Carmack, Outweaves, and Reeb repeatedly violated these rules. On October 26, 2021, 5 days after the accident, Carmack Outweaves started giving media interviews regarding the investigation. Instead of limiting such statements to those that serve a legitimate law enforcement purpose and are necessary to inform the public of the prosecutor's action, Carmack Outweaves began characterizing the evidence, for example, that there were an enormous amount of bullets on this set. So they're saying that these individuals who are prosecutors were unethical. That's what Alec Baldwin is alleging. Throughout the end of 2021 and first half of 2022, the FJDA repeatedly gave nationally televised interviews and issued public statements that improperly commented on important but contested facts in the case. For example, just 7 days after the incident, Carmack Outweaves stated on NBC News that Baldwin was the one that pulled the trigger, without any objective basis to have reached that conclusion, and long before any testing had been done to determine how or why the firearm had discharged. By the time Reeb joined the case in August 2022, she and Carmack Outweaves were preparing for a full-scale media blitz in violation of their prosecutorial duties. On January 18, 2023, the District Attorney's Office announced that it would reveal its charging decisions the following day. The announcement featured high-definition headshots of Carmack Outweaves and Reeb and promised there would be no news conference or public appearances by the DA's office in connection with the decision. In a press release issued the following day, the state announced that it planned to charge Baldwin with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter, plus a sentencing enhancement for the use of a firearm. The press release stated that the firearm enhancement makes the crime punishable by a mandatory 5 years in jail. The press release did not explain why Carmack Outweaves and Reeb had chosen to announce the charges before they were actually filed. Contrary to the solemn occasion without media appearances, Carmack, Outwees, and Reeb immediately appeared on national television programs to comment on the evidence, their legal theories of Baldwin's culpability, the impending charges, and Baldwin's possible sentence. Less than an hour after the district attorney's office announced its decision to charge Baldwin, Carmack, Outwees appeared on CNN and discussed Baldwin's responsibilities as an actor and producer and with respect to firearm safety on the Rust set. As a representative of the state, Carmack, Outwees asserted that Baldwin didn't do any of the things that he was supposed to do or make sure that anyone around him was safe, that Baldwin should have checked that gun, checked those projectiles, and that as a producer, Baldwin had a duty to make sure the set was safe, and he should have been aware that safety was an issue on set. These statements were neither true nor necessary to serve any legitimate law enforcement purpose. That same day, Carmack, Outwees discussed key pieces of evidence with a reporter from the Santa Fe New Mexican, and she appeared with Reeb on Fox News, stating that it was not a safe set and asserting that it was Baldwin's responsibility to ensure the set's safety. In the same interview, Reeb stated that a lab report had confirmed that definitely the trigger was pulled. She made basic assertions about Baldwin's mental state, including that Baldwin knows everything that goes on the set, including concerns that others have brought to management. Reeb omitted that the lab report referred to testing in which the FBI broke the firearm by hitting it repeatedly with a mallet. Oh, wow. So really, it seems that she mischaracterized the testing that is being referred to here. So Reeb also failed to mention the informal testing that the district attorney's office had conducted, which demonstrated that a single-action revolver can discharge without the trigger being pulled. So in yet another January 19, 2023 interview with NBC News, Reeb commented on Baldwin's guilt, stating that he is somebody who committed a crime. I want to read some of these media articles because, I mean, if these statements are being said so unequivocally, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate from a prosecutorial official. So Carmack, Outwees asserted conclusions about the evidence. For example, we know from the FBI report that he pulled that trigger. That's not what the FBI report showed. The same day, Brian Carpenter, an expert witness hired by the state, who would later perjure himself before the grand jury, appeared on Fox News to vouch for the prosecution team as being unbiased and as having done an excellent job. The state later disclosed that Carpenter billed the state $800 for each day of such interviews. Oh my heavens. Wow. On January 21st, 2023, Reeb again appeared on Fox News, where she commented on the contents of the FBI reports and Baldwin's prior statements, noting that all those statements would be admissible and would be used against Baldwin. In these national media appearances, she and Carmack, Outwees repeatedly stated that Baldwin was facing many years in prison. Wow. So they were really, according to Baldwin's lawyers, they were really going after him. They were really going after him, targeting him, to make it seem that, I guess, to color the public's perception of him. And they're really trying to try this case in the media. So, you know, wow, it is hard to believe if this is the case. On January 31st, 2023, the state filed an information charging Baldwin with 2 alternative felony counts of involuntary manslaughter. The last sentence of the second alternative count stated this offense shall be enhanced pursuant to the firearm enhancement statute. The information and accompanying statement of probable cause accused Baldwin of criminal involuntary manslaughter based on 2 theories: his role as actor and shooter and his role as producer. As an actor, the statement of probable cause faulted Baldwin for letting the armorer leave the church against protocol, not dealing with safety complaints on the set. not making sure the protocol of safety meetings were occurring, and not using a replica firearm for the unscheduled rehearsal without any objective basis to conclude that Baldwin had such authority. That those don't seem like things an actor would have responsibility for, ensuring safety on the set, or that safety meetings are being held. So that seems strange to me. As a producer, the statement of probable cause asserted that Baldwin was in a position to manage, oversee, commence, and require safety training to industry standards, and alleged that Baldwin allowed, through acts or omissions, the hiring of inexperienced and unqualified Gutierrez as Reed for this production, failed to mitigate or establish more precautions to protect against Gutierrez Reed's inexperience, or failed to demand the minimum safety standards, protocols, and requirements on set. The state's later disclosures demonstrate that Carpenter, who has no legal training, played an active role in developing the state's theory of prosecution, including by marking up the statement of probable cause with his edits. However, as explained above, Baldwin did not oversee the day-to-day production of the film and had no responsibility for the film's budget or the hiring of crew members. None of the producers who did have those responsibilities were charged. On the same day that it filed the information against Baldwin, the state announced charges against Dave Halls, the self-described last line of defense, who has publicly expressed that he bears some responsibility for Hutchinson's death. The charges: negligent use of a deadly weapon, a petty misdemeanor that carries a minimum sentence of 6 months in jail, and a fine of up to $500. Halls pleaded no contest and agreed to a suspended sentence and 6 months of probation pending approval. On February 7th, 2023, Baldwin moved to disqualify Reeb as the special prosecutor because her dual service as a member of the legislature and a special prosecutor violated the separation of powers provision of the New Mexico Constitution. That provision states that no person charged with the exercise of powers properly belonging to one of the legislative, executive, and judicial departments shall exercise any powers properly belonging to either of the other. So that's important, because under our Constitution, we know that there is a separation of powers. We have 3 branches of government here in the United States: executive, legislative, and judicial. So the prosecutors are part of the judicial branch of government. And when this individual, Reeb, was elected to the New Mexico state legislature, he then became part of the legislative branch. So what Baldwin is saying when he moved to disqualify Reeb was that this is a separation of powers, constitutional violation. You're straddling the fence here. You're a legislator, but you're also purporting to act in a judicial capacity, in prosecuting me. So Baldwin said, says Baldwin, so he was moving to disqualify that prosecutor. So then the provision states that no person charged with the exercise of powers properly belonging to one of the legislative, executive, and judicial departments shall exercise any powers properly belonging to either of the others. On February 10, 2023, Baldwin moved to dismiss the firearm enhancement, a statutory provision that had been enacted on May 18, 2022, after the accident. The charge violated the U.S. Constitution's ex post facto clause. The state eventually conceded both motions, but not before Carmack Outwees and Reeb attacked Baldwin and his counsel in the press for filing them. On February 7, 2023, immediately after Baldwin filed the disqualification motion, the FJDA spokesperson told the media that Baldwin and his lawyers can use whatever tactics they want to distract from the fact that Helena Hutchins died because of gross negligence and reckless disregard of safety on the Rust film set. After Baldwin filed the ex post facto motion on February 10, 2023, the FJDA spokesperson issued the following statement: "Another day, another motion from Alec Baldwin and his attorneys in an attempt to distract from the gross negligence and complete disregard for safety on the Rust film set that led to Helena Hutchins' death." The statement said that Carmack Outwees and Reeb would remain focused on justice and ensuring that everyone, even celebrities and fancy attorneys, is held accountable under the law. On February 16, 2023, Reeb emailed Baldwin's counsel demanding that he withdraw the ex post facto motion and threatened sanctions for its filing. She emailed him again shortly after, stating that she hadn't actually evaluated this issue because she was too busy serving in the legislature, but that she would review it soon. Then just 3 hours after the first email, Reeb emailed Baldwin's counsel admitting that she 100% agreed that charging the firearm enhancement violated the ex post facto clause of the U.S. Constitution. But when the state filed amended information without the firearm enhancement, it did not attribute the amended information to its filing of an unconstitutional charge, but to avoid further litigious distractions by Baldwin and his attorneys. To make that clear, the state added gratuitously that the prosecution's priority is securing justice, not securing billable hours for big city attorneys. So basically, it seems like they doth protest too much. The state added gratuitously that the prosecution's priority is securing justice, not securing billable hours for big city attorneys, further disparaging Baldwin and his counsel for exercising Baldwin's constitutional rights. So Baldwin's saying, hey, look, she admitted in an email that I was right and that the firearms enhancement charge that they brought against me violates the ex post facto clause of the U.S. Constitution, but then when they went and withdrew that charge, they basically said, hey, we just want to avoid more litigation from Baldwin and his attorneys, and they're trying to make Baldwin and his attorneys look bad. So essentially, he's saying what was happening behind closed doors was not what was happening in the reality. So this is a really important case because, Baldwin is standing up and he's saying, I feel like I was targeted. There were producers on this set that actually did have responsibility for safety, and they were not charged with a criminal offense, and I was charged. So, as an actor, he's not responsible for safety. There are crew members on set who are responsible. And then the state said, well, we're going to pull you in as a producer because you were a producer. But his producer role on this movie was not in charge of hiring the crew members. He was not in charge of props. So, he feels very targeted here. So then he goes on to state in his complaint, that at first the state dismissed the charges against him. And when the state's firearm experts issued a report questioning the state's theory about the condition of the revolver, the prosecutors hid the report. So he's again alleging concealment of evidence, gamesmanship, foul play. And then his complaint goes on to state that the trial court attempted to stop Morrissey, which is the district attorney in New Mexico, from rigging the grand jury process against Baldwin. There was a whole controversy about the grand jury. We've seen this all play out. And then his complaint goes on to state, despite the trial court rulings and in violation of her duties in New Mexico law, Morrissey misled the grand jury. So the grand juries are very powerful. They decide whether charges get filed, they decide whether there's an indictment. And he's alleging that there was foul play throughout this process. He states that the state presented false and incomplete grand jury testimony from lead investigator Detective Alexandra Hancock. Hancock is the one, he says, who perjured herself at the trial. They were not forthcoming. The state presented false and incomplete grand jury testimony from firearms expert Michael Haig. So then his complaint walks through all of that. the state presented false and incomplete grand jury testimony from Lane Looper. So basically, the attorneys do a great job of walking through all of the things that Alec Baldwin is claiming that was done wrong, that violated his constitutional rights, that violated his civil rights. The state presented false and incomplete grand jury testimony from Ross and Diego. And they're even citing some passages and testimony that supports his statements. And then the complaint goes on to allege that the state kept the grand jury from hearing testimony from witnesses that would have undermined an indictment. So he's saying, Alec Baldwin's attorneys are saying he never should have been even indicted to begin with. But the state kept the grand jury from hearing evidence that would have exonerated him. So after fraudulently obtaining Baldwin's indictment, the state violated his constitutional and statutory rights regarding evidence that the state possessed. So again, his attorneys walk through all of the alleged wrongdoing of the prosecution. And I want to get to the kind of the crux of this, which is his complaint. So as we know from going through the fronter on this lawsuit, his first complaint is for violation of Section 1983, which is a civil rights statute. He alleges that the state officials were acting under color of state law. And then he also has claims for spoliation, which is destruction of evidence, concealment of evidence. That's spoliation of evidence. Spoliation is a fancy word for saying spoliation. Spoliation is a fancy word for saying destruction of evidence. Then we have defamation, per se, and violation of New Mexico Civil Rights Act. And then at the end, he's asking for relief from the court. He is saying that he believes that he's entitled to general and or compensatory damages in an amount to be determined at trial for all injuries suffered as a result of the defendant's wrongdoing. He wants punitive damages, which are damages to punish the defendant, prejudgment interest at the maximum legal rate, costs of suit, attorney's fees, and such other and further relief as the court may deem just and proper. And he demands a trial by jury. And I think under these facts alleged, he will do very well before a jury. I think the jury is going to want to compensate him for this. Listen, we don't have all the facts here. We just have what he is laying out in his civil complaint. But if these prove true, if he carries his burden in the case, I think that a jury will really want to compensate him. So Alec Baldwin is beloved. I mean, he's very funny, and he's, this whole thing, I remember just being in such shock that he was being charged criminally with something that had happened on the set of a movie. But guys, thanks so much for bearing with me here as I recover from my flu. And I am so happy to be back with you guys live. I will be back here live continuously moving forward. We're going to continue to cover all of the stories that we've been covering thus far, including the Sean Diddy Combs, the Jay-Z drama, Tony Busby, Vanderpump Rules. Tom Sandoval has a new attorney in the Raquel Leviss, Ariana Madix case that's going on with Vanderpump Rules stars. We also have been covering the Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, their continued fight over their winery in Miraval. And we have been continuing to cover the Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively legal battles that are just continue. These lawsuits just continue to come out of the woodworks with all the PR firms involved.
So guys, subscribe for daily live streams. Subscribe for daily live streams on all of these celebrity and media news stories that we are covering, legal news, and I look forward to being back with y'all again tomorrow. Have a great night, friends.